Welcome to the Veil of Truth, your gateway to uncovering hidden insights and illuminating mysteries. I'm thrilled you've joined our global community. Whether you're watching from a bustling city skyline or a quiet countryside, we're glad you're here. Globe showing Europe, Africa, so tell me, where are you tuning in from today? Chapter 1, An Invitation to Surrey. Hercule Poirot sat in the quiet of his London apartment, a cup of delicate tisane steaming at his elbow, when the letter first arrived. The envelope was of heavy cream paper, the sort not commonly found in stationers, and bore upon its flap a crest delicately embossed in silver. Poirot, who never neglected the smallest of details, turned it over in his hands before breaking the seal with a paper knife polished to a shine. The letter within was written in a graceful, sloping hand. My dear Monsieur Poirot, I write in some urgency. A matter of personal delicacy compels me to request your presence at my home, Calcutta Grange, in Surrey. I am to host a gathering of friends this week to celebrate the unveiling of a jewel long in my family's possession, the Star of Calcutta, a sapphire of exceptional beauty and historic interest. It is my fear, I scarcely know why, that such an object might tempt ill-considered action. Your presence would reassure me greatly. With sincere esteem, Lady Henrietta Calcutta. Poirot read the letter twice, then laid it carefully upon his desk. His green eyes, usually placid, glimmered with quiet amusement. Voila, he murmured aloud, his accent lending music to the word. An old country house, a rare jewel, a lady who senses danger where none has yet revealed itself. It has the air of melodrama, does it not, Hastings? He looked up as if expecting his old friend to be seated across from him, though Captain Hastings was many miles away in South America. Poirot sighed softly, then straightened his moustache with careful fingers. And yet, he continued to himself, I have learnt never to dismiss the instinct of a woman, particularly one of breeding and intelligence. Instinct is the seed from which the truth may blossom. Thus it was that Poirot found himself, 2 afternoons later, in the back of a motorcar rattling along the winding roads of Surrey. September had gilded the countryside in tones of copper and russet. The hedgerows were thick, the fields misted with early evening haze. When at last the car turned between tall iron gates and climbed a gentle rise, Poirot beheld Calcutta Grange, a stone manor house of Georgian design, its windows catching the fading light, its gardens clipped into order as though reflecting the discipline of its mistress. A butler in sombre livery received him at the great oak doors. Monsieur Hercule Poirot? Lady Henrietta awaits you in the drawing-room. Poirot removed his hat, brushed an imaginary speck of dust from his immaculate coat sleeve, and followed with precise steps across marble flooring. The house exhaled the faint perfume of lavender polish and old wood. His keen eyes registered a row of ancestral portraits, their painted gazes stern, watchful. Lady Henrietta rose to greet him as he entered. She was a tall woman in her late 50s, her bearing graceful, her silver hair swept back beneath a simple band of pearls. Her hands, adorned with discreet rings, extended warmly. Monsieur Poirot, how very good of you to come at such notice. It is for me a pleasure, madam, Poirot said, bowing slightly. The countryside, it is most restful after the smoke of London. And to meet such a gracious hostess, that is a delight also. She smiled faintly, but shadows lingered in her eyes. You make me sound too fine, monsieur. The truth is, I am uneasy. The Star of Calcutta is to be shown tonight for the first time in many years. Its value, both sentimental and financial, is considerable. Poirot inclined his head. And you fear that temptation may walk among your guests? Yes. They are all friends, or so I believed. Yet one does not live to my age without learning that appearances may be deceiving. As she spoke, the first of the guests entered. Poirot turned to observe. A young man of perhaps 30, fair-haired and handsome, strode in with casual confidence. His evening coat was impeccably tailored, but his eyes bore the restless energy of one accustomed to gambling more than he could afford. "My son Edward," Lady Henrietta said quietly. Edward inclined his head to Poirot. "The detective, is it?" "Mother, really, must we mix entertainment with suspicion? You'll have us all under interrogation before the soup." Poirot merely smiled, his moustache twitching upwards. "Ah, but conversation, monsieur, it is so much more revealing than interrogation. One learns, if one listens." Edward laughed lightly, though colour rose in his cheeks. He turned away as another figure entered. This was a woman in her 30s, small and thin, her spectacles slipping upon her nose. She carried herself with a nervous, bird-like manner, her hands fluttering as she curtsied. "Miss Clara Phipps, my son's governess when he was a boy," Lady Henrietta explained. "She has lately returned to assist me with some household matters." Poirot bowed. "Mademoiselle." Miss Phipps murmured a greeting, but her gaze darted about the room as though expecting censure. Poirot stored the observation quietly. The introductions continued. Colonel Ashworth, a retired officer with a chest like a barrel and a moustache that rivaled Poirot's in ambition, shook hands with a grip too forceful. His manner was brusque, his voice booming. "Foreign detective, eh? Well, let us hope there's no mischief, but if there is, by Jove, I'll thrash the fellow myself." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Violence, mon colonel, it solves nothing. Precision, order, psychology, those are the weapons that matter." Next came Mrs. Lydia Trent, a widow in fashionable mourning, her black gown softened with lace. She was elegant, yet her smile carried a sharpness that hinted at mischief. She appraised Poirot with open curiosity. "And so this is the famous Belgian? How delightful! We shall all be on our best behaviour, no doubt." Poirot inclined his head gravely. "It is unnecessary, madam. I prefer people to be only themselves." Finally, a tall young man with dark hair entered, a leather portfolio beneath his arm. His suit was well cut but worn, his eyes quick and observant. "Mr. Julian March," Lady Henrietta announced. "An art dealer of some note, and a recent acquaintance." March shook hands warmly. "An honour, Monsieur Poirot. I confess I have long admired your, shall I say, method." "Flattery, monsieur, is the most dangerous of compliments," Poirot replied, though his smile was genial. As the party gathered, footmen lit the chandeliers. The golden light bathed the drawing-room, gleaming on polished wood and silver. Conversation flowed, brittle with courtesy yet underpinned by tension. Each guest carried, Poirot sensed, a private burden, debts, insecurities, resentments. Poirot, seated with perfect poise, surveyed them with eyes that missed no flicker. He sipped his tisane and murmured to himself, inaudible amid the chatter. Already, the stage is set. Already, the actors reveal themselves. Outside, dusk deepened over the Surrey hills. Within, the Star of Calcutta awaited its unveiling. Chapter 2, The Unveiling. Dinner at Chalcot Grange was conducted with all the formality of a household determined to uphold tradition. The long mahogany table gleamed under the soft light of candelabra. Footmen moved with silent precision, serving courses of turtle soup, sole in cream, and pheasant roasted to perfection. Lady Henrietta presided with unruffled dignity, though her glances at the clock did not escape Poirot's notice. She had promised that the evening would culminate in the unveiling of the Star of Calcutta. The very name seemed to ripple through the air like an incantation. Guests spoke of it in hushed tones between courses, as if even the mention of the gem could summon fortune or disaster. Edward Chalcot, already flushed with wine, leaned forward eagerly. "Mother, must we delay so long? The Sapphire should be seen by candlelight. There is nothing like the first impression, and I have boasted of it so thoroughly that March here insists it will disappoint." Mr. Julian March, seated opposite, smiled easily. I do not say disappoint, Calcutta. Only that one must temper enthusiasm. Too much praise can dull the senses. Let us allow the jewel to speak for itself. Colonel Ashworth harumphed loudly. Jewels are for women. I cannot see the fuss. Give me a good service medal, earned, not inherited, that is worth more than any stone dug from the earth. Spoken like a soldier, Mrs. Lydia Trent replied with a dry laugh. She toyed with her wine glass. But even medals, Colonel, are worn to be admired. We all crave attention in some form. The sapphire merely concentrates it in the most glittering fashion. Miss Clara Phipps, seated near Poirot, had remained largely silent. She pecked at her food, her eyes darting from one speaker to another. Now she said timidly, it must be very heavy, such a jewel. I should fear to wear it, lest it drag me down. Edward laughed. My dear Miss Phipps, the sapphire is not a yoke to the plough. It sits lightly enough, though worth more than any of us dare imagine. Poirot, observing these exchanges, stroked his moustache. Words, he knew, were the windows of character. Edward's boastfulness, March's restraint, Ashworth's disdain, Lydia Trent's cynicism, Clara Phipps's anxiety, each told a tale, if one knew how to listen. At last Lady Henrietta rose. We will not wait longer. If you will accompany me to the drawing room, I shall show you the Star of Calcutta. The company rose and followed, their footsteps soft on the Persian carpeted corridor. The drawing room was large, its walls hung with tapestries and portraits, its chandeliers casting a golden glow. At its center stood a polished table upon which rested a velvet-lined case of dark blue. Two footmen stood discreetly nearby, their faces impassive. Lady Henrietta moved with measured grace to the case. She lifted the lid slowly, almost ceremonially, and the jewel was revealed. Gasps escaped the assembly. The Star of Calcutta was magnificent. The sapphire, the size of a pigeon's egg, glowed with an inner fire, its blue depths alive with light that seemed to shift as one gazed upon it. The stone was mounted in a simple circlet of platinum and diamonds, yet it needed little ornament, it commanded attention on its own. Mon Dieu, Poirot murmured softly, stepping closer. It is indeed a star. The color, it is like the midnight sky after rain, when the moon has not yet risen. Julian March leaned forward, eyes gleaming. Exquisite. The clarity, the cut, it is of the finest workmanship. I should estimate its value at, well, I will not hazard a figure aloud, for fear of sounding absurd. But I will say this, few stones of such caliber exist outside royal treasuries. Mrs. Trent gave a short laugh. And yet here it lies, in Surrey, beneath our noses. How curious fate can be. Colonel Ashworth folded his arms. Pretty bauble, no doubt. But to my mind, it is nothing compared to loyalty, honor, and courage. A stone cannot save a man's life on the field. Edward's eyes, however, remained fixed upon the gem. His expression was not reverent but hungry. He reached as if to touch, and Lady Henrietta's hand came down firmly upon his wrist. No, Edward. Not now. Not without care. He colored, withdrawing quickly. Forgive me, mother. I was carried away. Miss Phipps gave a nervous cough. Such things, such treasures, they attract danger, do they not? One reads of robberies. One hears of dreadful things. Indeed, said Lady Henrietta gravely. That is precisely why Monsieur Poirot is with us. His presence is my reassurance. All eyes turned to Poirot, who bowed slightly, his expression serene. I am but an observer, madam. Yet it is true, jewels call forth not only admiration but also envy. It is the nature of man. Or woman. The sapphire was passed delicately from hand to hand, each guest examining it closely. Poirot noted how each reacted. Edward's fingers lingered longer than was seemly. Clara Phipps held it gingerly, as though it burned her. Colonel Ashworth barely glanced before thrusting it back. Lydia Trent turned it beneath the light, her lips curving in amusement. March inspected it with professional intensity, his eyes narrowing at some detail invisible to others. When at last the jewel was restored to its case, Lady Henrietta closed the lid with audible relief. "You see, monsieur," she said quietly to Poirot. "I do not imagine dangers without cause." The case was handed to the butler, who bore it with measured steps to Lady Henrietta's study. Poirot observed as the man locked it carefully within a small cabinet, pocketing the key. There was no sign of force, no clumsiness. All was in order. As the evening continued with music and light conversation, Poirot sat slightly apart, content to watch. His eyes moved from face to face, noting subtle expressions. Edward laughed too loudly, masking tension. Clara Phipps twisted her handkerchief. Colonel Ashworth told a war story, his voice booming. Lydia Trent whispered arch remarks that drew little smiles. March, silent now, scribbled in a notebook, perhaps making calculations. Poirot touched his moustache thoughtfully. It was in such moments, when the world seemed at peace, that the seeds of mischief were sown. The sapphire, glittering behind locked doors, was more than a stone. It was a magnet, pulling upon hidden desires, stirring envy and ambition. Poirot knew, with the certainty of instinct, that before long the Star of Calcutta would not lie so safely in its case. And when that moment came, he must be ready. Chapter 3, or the Theft. The morning at Chalcot Grange dawned pale and quiet, a thin mist clinging to the lawns. The house itself seemed to slumber after the previous night's festivities. But that tranquility was shattered at 8:30, when a cry echoed down the corridor outside Poirot's guest chamber. He rose at once, every sense alert. The cry came again, a woman's voice, high and stricken, the sapphire. "The Star of Calcutta, it is gone!" Within moments the household was in uproar. Poirot adjusted his dressing gown, smoothed his moustache, and descended the main staircase with deliberate calm. To rush, he often reminded himself, was to disturb the delicate arrangement of facts. One must enter the scene of a crime with the order of the mind intact. The commotion centered on Lady Henrietta's study, a chamber lined with dark oak shelves and heavy curtains drawn against the morning light. The butler, his usually impassive face now pallid, stood wringing his hands by the open cabinet. Lady Henrietta herself was seated at her desk, her fingers pressed to her temples, as if to steady herself. The guests arrived in a flurry, Edward half-dressed, his hair dishevelled, Miss Phipps pale and trembling, Colonel Ashworth gruff with indignation, Lydia Trent perfectly composed, though her eyes shone with something like excitement, Julian March scribbling rapidly into a small notebook as though recording events for posterity. Poirot entered last, his step light, his eyes sharp. He surveyed the room before speaking. "Mesdames, messieurs, pray be calm. Lady Henrietta, may I be permitted to see the place where the sapphire was kept?" She gestured weakly. "There, in the cabinet." It was locked. "The key," she turned to the butler. "Where is the key?" The man stammered, "In my possession, madam." "As always." "I keep it upon my watch chain." But when I opened the cabinet this morning to ensure all was well, it was empty. A hush fell. Poirot approached the cabinet. Its small brass lock gleamed, no scratches, no splintered wood betrayed a forced entry. He bent closer, his nose nearly touching, and sniffed. Faintly, very faintly, he caught the lingering scent of candle wax. His eyes narrowed. He straightened and turned to the assembly. This cabinet was not broken. The thief had access either by key or by some subtle imitation. It was a theft committed from within, not without. Edward burst out angrily. Then you mean to accuse the servants? They alone would have had opportunity in the night. Poirot raised a hand. Patience, monsieur. Let us not leap as the hound does to conclusions. Already you forget, you too had opportunity. Each of you, n'est-ce pas? You were guests within these walls. You knew the Sapphire was here. Colonel Ashworth growled. Are you suggesting one of us? Preposterous. Not suggesting, Poirot said gently. Only observing. The circle of suspicion, it is narrow. That is a fact, whether comfortable or not. Miss Phipps gave a small sob, clutching her handkerchief. Oh, it is dreadful, dreadful. I cannot bear it. Mrs. Trent leaned against the mantelpiece, her smile edged with irony. How very diverting. A jewel vanishes in the night, and we stand in a tableau of melodrama. Truly, Henrietta, your Sapphire has provided us with more entertainment than you promised. Lady Henrietta turned on her cousin, her voice sharp. This is no jest, Lydia. The Sapphire is irreplaceable. March, closing his notebook, interjected quietly, might I suggest, Lady Henrietta, that Scotland Yard be summoned. Such matters require official inquiry. Poirot's moustache bristled. Ah, but you forget, monsieur, I am myself no amateur. And Lady Henrietta, she has requested my assistance. Until she says otherwise, it is Hercule Poirot who shall investigate. The authority in his tone silenced even March. Poirot drew a chair to the center of the room and seated himself with composure. He placed his fingertips together and spoke with deliberate clarity. Now, we proceed in the order. Order, it is the key. We ask, who last saw the Sapphire? That, Miss Amos, was all of us, at the unveiling last night. We ask, where was it placed? In this cabinet, locked. We ask, who had knowledge of the key? The butler alone, who swears it never left his chain. Therefore, one of two things is true, either the key was borrowed in secret, or another key was made. Both require forethought. This was no crime of sudden impulse. It was planned. Edward shifted uneasily. But then, surely it must be a servant. They had access. Poirot's gaze rested on him, calm and unblinking. Access, yes. But motive? A jewel such as this is not easily sold by a servant. Too conspicuous. Too famous. Whereas, for another, the means of disposing might be at hand. Edward colored deeply but said no more. Poirot rose and began to move slowly about the room, his eyes darting to small details. He stooped to examine the carpet beneath the cabinet. There, faint but distinct, was a tiny drip of wax. He touched it with his fingertip, then held it to the light. Curious, he murmured. The lamps here, they are electric. Why then a candle? Who walks by candlelight when switches are at hand? A person who fears to be seen. A person cautious. Lydia Trent clapped softly, her laughter tinkling. Bravo, Poirot. You make even a drip of wax sound like a hanging clue. Poirot ignored her. He turned instead to Lady Henrietta. Madam, you must tell me who knew that the Sapphire was to be placed in this cabinet overnight. She hesitated. All of them. I said so at dinner, did I not? That it should rest there until it could be transferred to the bank. Then all had knowledge. Bon. And knowledge, it is as dangerous as the pistol in the pocket. Colonel Ashworth barked, well then, what's to be done? Shall we search the rooms? Lock the doors? If the stone was taken last night, the thief must still be here. Poirot smiled faintly. Exactly, mon colonel. The thief is among us still. But to search in haste, it is useless. Better we search with the little grey cells. First we establish truth from lies. He moved back to the chair, seated himself, and glanced at each guest in turn. We shall begin with the alibis. Where was each of you, Miss Amos, after retiring last night? The room fell silent. Each face betrayed unease. Poirot knew, as surely as he knew the perfection of his moustache, that the next hours would reveal cracks in every story. The Sapphire was gone. But Poirot also knew, when men and women speak of their doings, they reveal not only what they wish to hide but also what they cannot help but show. And it was through these contradictions, these smallest of details, that the truth, like the Star of Calcutta itself, would come to light. Chapter 4: The Footprints of Character. Hercule Poirot began his investigation as he began all things, with order. The guests were unsettled, nerves fraying beneath the surface, yet he insisted on calm procedure. Miss Amos, he declared in Lady Henrietta's drawing room, we shall take this matter one step at a time. A jewel does not vanish into smoke. Somewhere in this house it rests, hidden perhaps, but it rests. The thief is not a phantom. The thief is here. A silence followed, taut as a violin string. Edward Calcutta shifted in his seat, Miss Phipps wrung her hands, Mrs. Trent raised her brows with faint amusement, Colonel Ashworth glared like a bull, and Julian March regarded Poirot with professional detachment, as though he were appraising not a detective but a rival dealer in rare treasures. Poirot seated himself comfortably, crossing his neat patent leather shoes. We begin with the simplest of questions. Where was each person last night, after leaving the drawing room? Edward Calcutta. Edward was first to speak. I told you already, he said, rather too quickly. I went out onto the terrace for a smoke. Needed some air after all the fuss about the jewel. Poirot inclined his head. Alone, monsieur? Edward hesitated. Yes. Entirely alone. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And you returned to bed when? I couldn't say precisely. 11, perhaps nearer midnight. Poirot smiled faintly. The stars, they are very beautiful at such an hour, n'est-ce pas? You must have admired them. Edward frowned. Yes, of course. Poirot tucked away the hesitation. He had learnt more from Edward's manner than from his words. The young man had been anxious to end questioning swiftly. Too anxious. Miss Clara Phipps. Poirot turned next to the governess. And you, mademoiselle? Your evening. She spoke in a small voice, eyes downcast. I retired early. My head ached from the excitement. I read a little, then slept. Ah, and what did you read? Poirot asked gently. A book I had brought with me. A collection of sermons. Her face flashed as though embarrassed by the dullness of her choice. Poirot noted this with interest. And you heard nothing, saw nothing, after retiring? Nothing at all, she whispered. Bon. Then we continue. Yet Poirot's little grey cells twitched. He had caught, he thought, the faintest glimmer of tears in her eyes when she spoke. The woman carried some private burden, whether of guilt, fear, or sorrow, he could not yet say. Colonel Ashworth. The colonel sat squarely in his chair, legs apart, arms folded. Straight to bed after the port, he declared. Up early as always. I keep soldiers' hours. Nothing more to tell. Poirot bent his head. And yet, Colonel, your boots, they show fresh mud. Last night the lawns, they were damp. You walked outside. Ashworth's eyes narrowed. A short stroll. 10 minutes at most. I like to breathe the air before sleep. Nothing criminal in that, is there? Poirot smiled politely. "Mais non, certainly not. I merely observe." Ashworth grunted. "Well, observe elsewhere. I've nothing to hide." Mrs. Lydia Trent. Poirot turned to Lady Henrietta's cousin. "And you, madam?" She laughed softly. "Oh, I confess to a little wonder. The house was too quiet for my taste. I went through the gallery of portraits, admiring the stern visages of our ancestors. They seemed almost to disapprove of my intrusion." Poirot nodded. "And the time?" "Perhaps 11:30. Perhaps later. Time slips away when one walks alone." Her tone was airy, but Poirot's ears were sharp. She enjoyed provoking. She had not answered directly. He let it pass, for now. "Julian March." At last Poirot turned to the art dealer. "And monsieur, your knight?" March leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "In the library, until well after midnight. I was examining a monograph Lady Henrietta possesses on Mughal jewellery. A fascinating text. When at last fatigue overcame me, I retired." Poirot's gaze flicked to Lady Henrietta, who inclined her head. "The monograph is indeed in my library." Poirot smiled. "And you read by electric lamp, monsieur?" March hesitated. "Why, yes, of course." Poirot's eyes lingered upon him a moment longer before turning away. The hesitation was brief but significant. Poirot reflects. When all had spoken, Poirot rose. He moved slowly about the study, touching the edge of the cabinet, the back of a chair, the frame of a painting. His silence was deliberate, a cord stretched across the company, forcing them to endure the weight of his scrutiny. At last he spoke. "Each of you gives an account, yet in each account there are gaps. A smoke upon the terrace, a stroll with the mud, a walk among portraits, a book of sermons, a monograph. So neat, so simple, and yet, perhaps, too simple." He returned to his chair and tapped the armrest with a finger. "The truth, Miss Amos, is like a cat. It hides, it slinks into corners. But in the end, it reveals itself. Always." Lady Henrietta, pale but composed, said quietly, "Then you believe the thief is among us?" Poirot inclined his head. "Without doubt. There was no break-in. No stranger. One of those seated here lifted the sapphire." Gasps, protests, mutterings filled the room. Poirot raised his hand. "Peace. I do not yet say who. But I will say this, the thief is clever. The lock left unmarked, the key untouched, it speaks of skill, of planning. And yet even the cleverest criminal, they cannot disguise the psychology. That, Miss Amos, is where Hercule Poirot shall look." He rose briskly. "For now, I request each person remain within the house. The servants too. No one departs until the sapphire is found." The Colonel growled assent, Edward scowled, Lydia Trent smirked, March only shrugged, and Miss Phipps appeared close to tears. Poirot smoothed his moustache with satisfaction. Already he saw the patterns forming, faint as footprints in the dew. It was psychology, not mud or wax or locks, that would lead him to the truth. For human beings, unlike jewels, cannot help but betray themselves. And so Poirot began, quietly and inexorably, to follow the footprints of character. Chapter 5: Red Herrings and Shadows. The atmosphere at Chalcot Grange grew heavier with each passing hour. Breakfast was served in the great dining room, but the clink of silver upon china could not mask the unease that spread like fog among the guests. Even the servants moved more stiffly, their eyes lowered, as though afraid to meet the gaze of their mistress. Poirot, serene as ever, ate his boiled egg with neat precision. He spread butter upon his toast, cut into exact quarters, and sipped his tisane. To all appearances he was the calmest man in the room. Yet behind his composed gaze, the little grey cells were dancing. He began to probe with casual remarks. It is curious, is it not, how quickly a thing so precious may vanish. One moment it dazzles before our eyes, the next it is nothing but a memory. Edward muttered into his coffee, all the more reason to hand such things to a bank instead of flaunting them in a country house. Mrs. Trent gave a sharp laugh. You speak as though you were not the one boasting of it most last night. Edward flushed. I simply wish to show pride in my family's heritage. Poirot's moustache twitched. Pride, monsieur? Or hunger? The remark fell like a stone into a pond, ripples of discomfort spreading around the table. Edward's hand trembled slightly as he set down his cup. Poirot noticed, everyone noticed. Whispers below stairs. After breakfast Poirot strolled into the servants' corridor. The butler bowed stiffly, but Poirot waved him away with a polite smile. He paused instead by a maid polishing brass. A jewel, it dazzles, does it not? Poirot said conversationally. The girl looked up, startled. Oh, sir, I wouldn't know. I only saw it once, when they carried it past. Like blue fire, it was. Ah, and in the night, did you hear footsteps? A door that opened? The maid hesitated. I heard Master Edward walking. Past midnight, he was pacing like. Poirot thanked her gravely and moved on. Another servant, a young footman, confided in hushed tones that Miss Phipps had been weeping in her room late into the night. Over what, I cannot say, the boy added. But her candle was still lit near 1 o'clock. Poirot smiled faintly. Candles again, he murmured. Always the candles. Afternoon tensions. By mid-afternoon, the house resembled a cage of restless birds. Colonel Ashworth stalked the halls like a sentry. Lydia Trent lounged with her embroidery, pricking the cloth as if it were the skin of an enemy. Edward smoked endlessly, his nerves raw. Miss Phipps avoided all eyes, scurrying like a guilty shadow. And March observed, silent and calculating, as though the unfolding drama were an exhibition mounted for his professional study. Poirot moved among them with courtesy, engaging in small conversations that appeared trivial but were anything but. With Miss Phipps he asked softly, You did not sleep, mademoiselle? The candle burned late. She started, her hands twisting. Who said so? That is untrue. Entirely untrue. Poirot inclined his head. Then forgive me. Perhaps it was imagination. She bit her lip and turned away, a tear trembling at the corner of her eye. With Colonel Ashworth he remarked, the air last night, it was damp, was it not? The mud, it clings. Ashworth scowled. Damn the mud. You make too much of a simple stroll. With soldiers, Poirot murmured, there is never a simple stroll. Each step, it leaves a mark. The colonel growled but said no more. With Lydia Trent he spoke of jewels. They fascinate you, madame, n'est-ce pas? Yet you laugh at them. She smiled slyly. One laughs loudest at what one desires. Did you not know that, monsieur? Poirot's eyes narrowed, but she only returned to her embroidery, humming. With March, Poirot was blunt. Monsieur, you admire jewels as others admire art. But tell me, if one wished to sell such a sapphire, where would it go? March raised his brows. Impossible to sell openly. Too famous. Only a private collector, discreet and very wealthy, would dare. But finding such a buyer, that requires connections. Connections which you, perhaps, possess. Poirot suggested. March smiled thinly. It is my trade to know such people. Poirot's reflection. By evening, Poirot sat once more in the study, alone, his fingertips pressed together. He reviewed the facts. Edward, debts, eagerness, pacing at night. Too obvious? Perhaps. Miss Phipps, nervous, weeping, a candle burning late. Fear, not greed, seemed her burden. Ashworth, mud upon his boots, hostility in his manner. A soldier who despised duels, yet soldiers also know strategy. Lydia Trent, mocking, sharp, hinting at hidden desire. A woman who relished scandal. March, professional knowledge, access to markets for stolen gems. Too calm, too calculating. And over all hung the faint scent of candle wax, the single drip by the cabinet. A detail small, but never meaningless. Poirot murmured aloud, "It is like the chessboard. Each piece moves in a pattern. Already I see some patterns forming, others not. But there is deception here, shadows and mirrors. Red herrings, yes. Someone throws dust in my eyes. But Hercule Poirot, he does not sneeze." A game of psychology. At supper, Poirot introduced a stratagem. Between the soup and the fish course, he remarked casually, "I am told the police have now such clever dogs, trained to sniff jewels, even through cloth. If the stone remains in this house, the dogs will surely find it tomorrow." The effect was immediate. Edward dropped his fork with a clatter. "Dogs? Here?" Miss Phipps went white as linen, her lips trembling. Colonel Ashworth scoffed loudly, though his laugh rang false. Mrs. Trent smirked, amused. "What a delicious idea. Imagine the hounds dragging Edward's socks from his drawer." March's hand trembled as he lit a cigarette, the flame wavering. "Surely, Poirot, such methods are theatrical." Poirot only smiled. "Theatre, monsieur, can reveal the truth. People, they play roles, until the curtain rises. Then the truth, it steps forward." Poirot's certainty. Later, in the privacy of his chamber, Poirot reflected on what he had seen. Each reaction had been a performance, but not all actors managed their lines well. Edward had shown fear, yes, but of scandal more than guilt. Miss Phipps trembled with secrets, but not the hard secrets of theft. Ashworth's laughter was forced. Lydia Trent hid mischief but little else. March, however, had trembled only for a second, then masked it. And Poirot, who never missed the tiniest quiver of a hand or flicker of an eye, filed this detail away. The shadows were thick, the red herrings many, but the path was narrowing. Somewhere in this house lay the Star of Calcutta. Somewhere in this house sat the thief. And Hercule Poirot, his moustaches perfectly symmetrical, intended to find both. Chapter 6, The Trap is Set. A storm brewed outside the windows of Chalcot Grange. By afternoon, clouds had gathered like a regiment of grey soldiers, and rain lashed the panes with restless fury. Within, the guests gathered in uneasy silence, every clap of thunder seeming to echo the tension that had settled over the house. Poirot sat at a small writing desk, polishing his moustache with deliberate calm. His mind, however, moved swiftly. He knew now that to wait for the truth to surface by chance would be folly. It was time to act. "Lady Henrietta," he said quietly, beckoning her into the study, "I must request your assistance. We shall set a little stage, and upon it, the thief will reveal himself." Her pale face showed both relief and apprehension. "You mean to lay a trap?" Poirot inclined his head. "Precisely. A trap most delicate. For thieves, madam, they are like moths. They flutter toward the flame of opportunity, unable to resist. The rumor of discovery." That evening, over tea in the drawing-room, Poirot made his announcement with artful casualness. "Miss Amos," he began, "I have some progress to report." A fragment of the jewel's casing has been discovered in the library fireplace. Gasps broke out. Edward swore softly. Miss Phipps pressed a hand to her throat. Mrs. Trent leaned forward eagerly. Colonel Ashworth barked, "The fireplace? What the devil does that mean?" "It means," Poirot replied, "that the sapphire cannot have travelled far. If part of its casing remains, then the jewel itself may yet be hidden within this house." March's voice was smooth, but his eyes flickered. "Then the thief grows careless. Or desperate," Poirot returned. He let the words hang. Poirot's discovery was, of course, invention. No casing lay in the fireplace. Yet he observed the faces before him with hawk-like intensity. Each reaction etched itself upon his little grey cells. The decoy jewel. Later that night, Poirot prepared the second act of his trap. He called Lady Henrietta, Edward, and the butler into a small conference. "Miss Amos," he explained, "I shall place a replica in the cabinet, a jewel of paste, but most convincing to the eye. We shall lock it once more. Tomorrow, we will see if temptation proves too great." Lady Henrietta hesitated. "But if they discover the trick?" Poirot smiled. "Then I shall know more than I know now. The thief, he will show his hand, in haste, in caution, or in silence." The butler was instructed to spread discreet whispers among the staff, that the jewel had been partially recovered, that Poirot worked closely with the police, and that soon the culprit would be caught. Poirot knew well how swiftly such whispers climbed from the servants' hall to the guests' ears. Rumour, in a great house, travelled faster than fire. The night of waiting. That night was long. Rain battered the windows. Thunder rolled. Poirot, however, slept not at all. He remained in the study, a book upon his lap, though he scarcely turned a page. His ears remained sharp, attuned to every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of fabric in the corridors. At midnight, he heard it, the faintest tread upon the landing. Poirot rose noiselessly. He moved to the door, peering through the crack. A figure descended the stairs, shadow slipping like a thief of air itself. The outline was indistinct. Poirot glimpsed only the quick turn of a head, the nervous clutch of hands. The figure vanished into the drawing-room. Poirot waited. 10 minutes. 15. Then, soundlessly, he followed. The drawing-room lay dim, lit only by the dying embers of the fire. The cabinet gleamed faintly in the gloom. Its lock was unfastened. Poirot bent close. The paste replica was gone. He allowed himself a small smile. The moth had flown straight into the flame. Morning revelations. At breakfast, Poirot rose with an air of gravity. "Lady Henrietta," he announced, "would you be so good as to unlock the cabinet?" She complied, though her fingers trembled. The door swung open. The velvet cushion lay bare. A chorus of exclamations filled the room. Edward leapt up. "Gone again? But how?" "We were watched." Poirot lifted his hand. "Do not distress yourselves. The stone removed last night was not the sapphire. It was a worthless copy. I placed it there myself." Gasps again. Mrs. Trent laughed aloud, delighted by the drama. Miss Phipps turned pale. March's lips tightened into a line. Ashworth muttered, "By Jove." Poirot surveyed them all. "Thus we know this much: the thief, unable to resist temptation, returned in the night. The true sapphire remains hidden, but the hands that reached for the false jewel, they belong to the guilty party." Suspicions deepen. The revelation set the household ablaze with speculation. Edward accused March in heated tones. Lydia Trent hinted slyly at Edward's debts. Colonel Ashworth thundered about dishonour. Miss Phipps, caught in the storm of suspicion, wept silently. Poirot let them quarrel, observing each with sharp amusement. Every accusation, every defence, was another brushstroke upon the canvas of truth. At last he intervened. "Miss Amos, quarrelling achieves nothing. Already I have narrowed the circle. Soon, very soon, the truth shall stand naked before us all." He turned to Lady Henrietta. "I request once more that no one leave the house. The drama nears its end. The curtain will rise tomorrow." Poirot's silent certainty. That evening Poirot walked the gallery of portraits alone. Lightning flared through the tall windows, illuminating the stern visages of long-dead Calcutts. Their painted eyes seemed to follow him, demanding justice for the theft of their legacy. Poirot paused before one portrait, a young officer in bright uniform, eyes proud, hand upon sword. "You would understand discipline, mon colonel," he murmured. "But even soldiers, they may betray themselves." He touched the glass lightly, then turned away. He had seen enough. The trap had been sprung, the guilty one had shown their hand. All that remained was to gather the company, to display his little theatre of truth, and to unmask the thief with elegance and certainty. Hercule Poirot smiled to himself, moustaches quivering with satisfaction. "The game, she is nearly over," he whispered. "Tomorrow, the curtains part, and Hercule Poirot takes his bow." Chapter 7. Gathering the Threads. The storm that had raged through the night left the morning air heavy and damp. Low mist clung to the lawns, and the oak stood dark against the pale sky. Calcutta Grange seemed itself to brood, its ancient stones holding secrets as stubbornly as the people within. At 10 o'clock sharp, Poirot requested that all the household, guests and servants alike, assemble in the drawing-room. His request carried the tone not of suggestion but of command. None dared disobey. The company gathered uneasily. Edward paced before the fireplace. Miss Phipps sat very still, her hands clasped as though in prayer. Colonel Ashworth loomed in a corner, scowling. Lydia Trent reclined with studied indifference, embroidery in her lap though she did not sew a stitch. March leaned upon his cane, his gaze sharp, assessing. Lady Henrietta presided from her chair, pale but composed, dignity her armour. The servants lined the wall, shifting nervously. Poirot entered last, immaculate as ever, his patent leather shoes gleaming, his moustaches stiff with perfection. He looked round at them with benevolent eyes. "Miss Amos," he began, "the time has come to draw together the little threads. A tapestry it is, at first a confusion of knots and colours, but at last, a pattern emerges. And now, I shall trace for you this pattern. The candle and the wax." He gestured toward the empty cabinet. First, there was the matter of the lock. It was not forced, it was not broken. Someone with knowledge, or with opportunity, opened it. Near the cabinet, a drip of candle wax. A clue most delicate. Miss Phipps started, colour draining from her face. Poirot turned gently toward her. "Mademoiselle, you sat close to the cabinet during our evening together. You use candles, do you not?" "Late into the night." She stammered. Yes, I did. But that proves nothing. Many people use candles." "Ah," Poirot said softly. "But not many weep over them. Your candle burned long, you were seen with your eyes red. You suffer from some grief, mademoiselle, perhaps some shame. But grief, it is not theft. Non, I do not believe you stole the sapphire." She gave a strangled sob of relief, though the others eyed her with suspicion. Poirot moved on before the tide could turn. The soldier's boots. Next, the mud. "Colonel Ashworth, you told us you took a stroll before bed. Yet your boots bore heavy mud, as though you lingered long on the damp lawns. Why the untruth?" Ashworth's jaw tightened. I don't like being spied upon. Yes, I walked longer than I said. I couldn't sleep. I thought the air might clear my head. Poirot nodded gravely. So. A small lie, but a lie nonetheless. It makes one wonder what else you conceal. Yet, I ask myself, does a man such as you, who despises jewels, truly risk dishonor for the sake of a stone? My heart says no. The colonel gave a grunt, half of relief, half of defiance. The debt of Edward Calcutta. Poirot's gaze moved to Edward, who stiffened under the weight of it. Monsieur Edward, you smoke much, you pace much. The servants saw you restless after midnight. And it is known, is it not, that you have debts? Edward flushed crimson. Who told you that? It is true, yes, but not shameful. Many young men have debts. But I swear I would never steal from my own family. Poirot spread his hands. Your agitation, your quick temper, they suggest guilt. But agitation may come also from fear, the fear that suspicion falls upon you, the heir. Again, I am not yet satisfied. Edward sank back into his chair, muttering. Lydia's provocations. Madame Trent, Poirot continued, you mock, you laugh, you speak with lightness. And yet, I suspect your laughter hides something. Not theft perhaps, but desire, certainly. You walk the galleries at night, you delight in scandal. But what of jewels? To you, they are symbols of envy, are they not? She raised her brows. What if they are? Envy is not theft either. You think me vain and frivolous, monsieur, but not a thief. And you are right. Poirot inclined his head. I thank you for your honesty. Yes, your envy is real, but your courage to jest openly tells me you are not the hand that reached for the sapphire. She gave a small smile of triumph, though her eyes glinted. The dealer's knowledge. Finally, Poirot turned to March. His voice grew quieter, sharper. And now, Monsieur March. You alone spoke with authority of how such a gem might be sold. You alone remained calm when all others fretted. Yet calmness, when overdone, is itself suspicious. And when I spoke of police dogs, you trembled, but only for a moment, before regaining control. March gave a cool smile. You flatter me, Poirot. Calmness is my trade. Dealers must appear collected. Ah, but a dealer also knows value. And a jewel such as this, too famous to sell publicly, too rare to hide forever, it demands special channels. Such channels, monsieur, you possess. And so, the suspicion gathers. March said nothing, his eyes hooded. Poirot summarizes. Poirot clasped his hands together. Thus, we have contradictions, the candle, the mud, the debts, the laughter, the calmness. Each one a thread. Alone, they are weak. Together, they form a rope that binds the guilty. But who, Miss Amos, is the thief? Who returned in the night for the false stone, proving their greed or their desperation? Gasps and whispers broke out. The servants exchanged fearful glances. Edward muttered something dark. Miss Phipps began to sob quietly. Poirot raised his hand. Peace. The answer, she will come soon. Tomorrow I shall give you the truth entire. But tonight we allow the guilty one last chance. For the thief knows I am close. They know the net tightens. He turned to Lady Henrietta. Madam, lock again the cabinet, though it is empty. We shall see if our moth returns to flutter at the flame once more. The weight of waiting. The day dragged on, heavy with suspicion. Guests avoided one another in corridors, speaking in whispers. The servants moved like shadows, terrified of being accused. Rain returned in the afternoon, trapping everyone indoors with their unease. Poirot, however, remained unflustered. He played a game of patience, arranging his chessmen upon a board in the library, studying each move with care. Edward hovered near the brandy. The Colonel stalked the halls. Miss Phipps retired early, pale as paper. Lydia hummed as she embroidered, though her needle pricked her finger until blood stained the linen. March wrote letters that no one saw posted. The house was a hive of nerves. Poirot's quiet confidence. That night, Poirot sat once more in the study, his head bent, fingers pressed together. He had seen all he needed to see. The lies, the fears, the greed, the pretenses, all lay exposed. He whispered to himself, the thief has shown their nature. Tomorrow, I shall reveal them. And then, Miss Amos, the tapestry will be complete. Outside, the rain beat harder. Inside, Hercule Poirot waited, serene, knowing that the curtain was about to rise on his final act. Chapter 8, The Truth Revealed. Morning broke with a pale, uncertain sun that struggled against the mist clinging to the grounds. Within Calcutta Grange, the atmosphere was taut, every corridor buzzing with whispers. None of the guests had slept well. Suspicion weighed too heavily, every creak of the house had sounded, in the night, like a thief at work. At precisely 11 o'clock, Poirot summoned everyone to the drawing-room. Lady Henrietta, pale but resolute, sat at the head of the room. The others filed in one by one, casting wary glances at each other. The servants lined the wall, drawn by the irresistible pull of drama. Poirot stood before the cabinet, empty now, but locked once more. His figure was immaculate as always, shoes polished to a mirror gleam, moustache waxed into perfect symmetry. His eyes, however, were bright with the satisfaction of a man who sees the puzzle complete. Miss Amos, he began, we have danced long enough in the shadows. Today, the little grey cells, they give us the truth. I shall show you how the jewel was stolen, and by whom. A ripple of tension passed through the room. Clearing the innocent. Poirot raised a hand. First, we must separate the innocent from the guilty. Suspicion has fallen on each of you, but not all suspicions are just. Consider Mademoiselle Phipps. The governess looked up with wide, frightened eyes. You were seen weeping, your candle burned late, and wax lay upon the carpet. But these were the signs of sorrow, not theft. You mourn a personal grief, I shall not expose it, for it is your own. But theft? No. Your fear was of disgrace, not discovery. You are innocent. Miss Phipps burst into tears of relief. Poirot turned to Colonel Ashworth. You, monsieur, lied of your walk. The mud betrayed you. But what was your motive? Not greed, you despise finery. Your pride, it would never permit such a dishonor. Again, suspicion misled us. You two are innocent. The Colonel grunted, shifting uneasily. Poirot's gaze moved to Lydia Trent. Madam, your envy sparkled as brightly as the sapphire. But envy alone does not lead to crime. You laugh, you provoke, you stir trouble, but you did not steal. For to steal requires secrecy, and secrecy is foreign to your nature. Lydia gave a shrug, half amused, half irritated. Edward, Poirot continued, your debts made you appear the obvious suspect. Too obvious. You are hot-blooded, impulsive, but theft of this cunning? None. Your guilt was only the fear that others would think you guilty. You two are exonerated. Edward let out a shaky breath, though his pride prevented thanks. The remaining suspect. At last, Poirot turned to Julian March. The room grew still. Only one remains. Monsieur March, the dealer in jewels, the man who alone could find a buyer for such a stone. You alone had both the knowledge and the calmness to attempt this crime. And yet, you were not as calm as you wished us to believe. March gave a thin smile. A convenient accusation, Poirot. But proof? Poirot's eyes glowed. Ah, the proof, she is there. Let us review. First, the lock, no marks, no scratches. It was opened with skill. A dealer, he knows such mechanisms, for often he inspects cases and cabinets. Second, the wax, yes, a candle was used, but not by mademoiselle. By you, monsieur. For you alone sat near the cabinet after the lights dimmed. A sliver of wax clung to your cuff, I saw it though you brushed it away. Gasps broke out. March's face darkened. Circumstance, nothing more. Third, Poirot pressed on, the false stone. When it was taken, you betrayed yourself. You did not protest loudly like Edward, nor tremble openly like Miss Phipps. No, you kept silence, too much silence. And yet your hand shook when you lit your cigarette. Only for a second, but Hercule Poirot sees such seconds. The hand that has touched a jewel it should not touch will always tremble when another stone is mentioned. Poirot recreates the theft. Poirot stepped toward the cabinet. Let me describe the crime. After we left the drawing room, you remained behind for a moment. With a candle borrowed from the mantel, you softened the wax within the keyhole, and with a small tool, perhaps a dealer's wire, you turned the lock. The jewel you took swiftly, slipping it into your pocket. Later, when others slept, you hid it not outside, not in your chamber, but in this very house, somewhere safe until suspicion cooled. He paused, letting the silence thicken. But then came temptation. When I placed the false jewel, you could not resist. You returned in the night, believing it real, and you took it. That action, monsieur, condemned you. The innocent would not risk a second theft. The hiding place. March's composure faltered. His lips thinned. All clever talk. Yet you have not produced the sapphire. Without it, your words are but theatre. Poirot's moustaches twitched. Theatre, monsieur? My's OUI. But in my theatre, the climax is always satisfying. The stone, it is hidden not far from where it was first displayed. You placed it within the lining of the very cushion upon which it rested. The hiding place so simple, so audacious, no one would suspect. Gasps again. Lady Henrietta rose in shock. Poirot crossed to the cabinet, lifted the cushion, and with a delicate gesture split a seam. From within spilled a glimmer of blue, dazzling, radiant, unmistakable. The Star of Calcutta. Cries erupted. Lady Henrietta clasped her hands in relief. Edward exclaimed. The servants crossed themselves. Poirot held the jewel aloft. Voila! The jewel returns to its rightful place. And Monsieur March, the game, she is over. The thief unmasked. March's face, once cool, contorted with fury. You meddling Belgian! Do you think I would let such a prize languish in a dusty cabinet? I would have found a buyer, a collector who understood its worth. Poirot bowed slightly. Perhaps. But you forgot one thing, the psychology. A thief may plan, may calculate, but he cannot disguise the little tremors of the heart. That, monsieur, betrayed you. Two footmen stepped forward, at Lady Henrietta's signal. March made no resistance. He sagged, defeated, as though the weight of the Grange itself pressed upon him. Poirot's closing words. When order was restored, Poirot placed the sapphire back upon its velvet cushion. Lady Henrietta, your family's treasure is safe once more. Guard it well, for beauty such as this, it brings always the envy, the greed, the danger. She inclined her head, her eyes shining with gratitude. Monsieur Poirot, we are forever in your debt. Poirot smiled, smoothing his moustache. Mais non, madame. It is only that Hercule Poirot, he loves order. A jewel must rest where it belongs. A crime must be answered. And above all, the truth, she must be revealed. The guests dispersed, some in relief, some in shame. The servants whispered in awe. Poirot, serene, requested only a tisane and a quiet chair. Another case closed. Another pattern complete. And once again, Hercule Poirot proved that no thief, however cunning, could escape the gaze of his little grey cells.